And it's the Eclectic Parrot Show, Triple R, 4 minutes past the hour of 12 o'clock. Bob and Kate. Good morning, Kate.
Hello, Bob.
You're back, mate.
Yeah, I'm back for a little while.
Back from the bloody dreaded poster putting up. Did you get busted for sticking posters up for that benefit?
No, we did. We got covered in flour and water, but...
Covered, not tarred and feathered by...
No. We're all absolutely stiff. We couldn't bend over. We were just flour and water from head to tail.
Well done, 99. You couldn't afford paste, I suppose. Flour and water had to be it.
Well, we only actually decided we were going to do it at about 2 o'clock one morning, so it was a bit late for 7-Eleven. I mean, they don't have wallpaper glue, we discovered.
All right, more about posters and the St Kilda thing very shortly. Mum, good morning.
Good morning.
And how have you been going? We haven't seen you on here for a while.
It's about a month.
About a month. Have you been behaving yourself?
As usual.
As usual, unlike your son here. All right, and show today, well, Lionel Elmore coming on. Excellent old naturalist, brilliant naturalist. We won't call him old. Reggie gets up me for calling him old too. Can't call Lionel old, but brilliant naturalist. And about barred bandicoots, something that's in the news with the government plan to relocate them, a certain population, to Jellybrand Hill. Also, Gerard Closs is coming in a little bit later on, and he'll be talking about Plenty Gorge. A little bit later on, sounds like that, late night. AB, what is it, Channel 7 News. A little bit later on, we're going to have, Gerard bringing you a report. Anyway, he'll be coming in. Peter Piggott on the Palmer story. We're going to try to get Peter. And I was delighted when I was trying to contact Peter this morning. There was an article on the front page of the Australian, which we'll mention briefly on Notes of the News, about Palmer wallabies and their reintroduction. And when we're trying to find Peter, he runs Peter's Toy Shop. In Sydney. Peter Piggott's toy shop. Yeah, it's great. It's good to see. What an amazing job for a naturalist.
What's the Palmer story?
This is Palmer wallabies.
Palmer wallaby.
Yeah, very interesting one. A bit later.
Peter Pickled Palmer.
Palmer wallaby. Yeah. Jabiru and Swan Palm. There's a fantastic old book that I've had. And like many old books, you tend to just flick through and only get bits and pieces. But there's a Ripper Palm by Banjo Patterson about Black Swan. I'll attempt to read that on air. And a story about the Jabiru, and the contrast in the way the old natural history writers write about wildlife is just fantastic. The contrast fantastic. The way they write is good. Really descriptive, really good stuff. Also, Roger, of course, online at 1:30, and Kevin Grover online at about 1:40, and Kevin's going to be talking about Herring Island. Also, and yesterday, and I suppose first up, we went for a talk by Vincent Saventi on green corridors and greening of corridors, making corridors right across the countryside for animals and birds and things to move along. And these are corridors of trees, corridors of plants, corridors of ground stories along creekways and waterways. Ironically, the talk was given at the Nunawading Arts Centre. I say ironically because Nunawading is one of the councils that supports the arterial road project up the Mullum Creek.
And they're going to destroy their corridor.
We're going to destroy the best urban wildlife corridor in Victoria. And it was almost a sheer embarrassment to watch the mayor and Barry Pullum, the local member from down your way, or St Kilda Station Pier way anyway, talking about all
Barry
these...
Pullum, no, he's Melbourne.
Melbourne, is he?
Melbourne. Bunna Walsh's.
So Barry Pullum's Melbourne.
Right, yeah.
But it was almost an embarrassment to them. Here they are with all these Eddie Freeway people who were really polite and good naturalists, like you've heard Scott Baker on air before. They were all there in force. And, it was quite interesting. I don't know what the result is. Spoke to Barry Pullum a bit after it. One of those examples where I think that to go into an environment effects statement when the area has such outstanding biological merits is a waste of taxpayers' money. And Barry Pullum knows all about waste of taxpayers' money because he was involved with Station Pier. And that was the classic case of not doing preliminary survey work and then discovering the most polluted site ever discovered in the history of the Environment Protection Authority, which has cost everyone millions of dollars, particularly taxpayers and developers. So I suppose this is yet another case where decisions should be made earlier. Okay, Kate. St Kilda people got fired up at both the elections and at the benefit. First, the elections. What happened?
Well, the whole Saturday, I think, was a pretty strong statement from people in St Kilda. The election results were as fantastic as one could have hoped for.
Firstly, how many candidates stood?
Oh, there was a hell of a lot. There was, I think it was just about five in 3 wards and just 2 in 1.
Right.
So all up there was about 20. candidates. Yeah. One of the things that we did, and one of the reasons why we're holding this benefit, is this group called Save St Kilda that took out an ad in the local paper the week before, which we asked all of the candidates 3 key questions about development issues and published their results, which was really very interesting. Because basically you've got your Turn the Tide mob and the few independents who are associated with them who are certainly the best of a bad lot. Then you've got this group called the Ratepayers Association, which is St Kilda's answer to the National Front, I think. And they'd obviously all been talking to each other. I mean, there were a few people that are getting pretty anxious about giving answers, but all of the answers were quite revealing and a lot more consistent than I think they expected them to be. A few people just declined to answer, that is refused.
And that would come up badly, of course, in the ad.
It came up very, very badly, those that refused to answer. Yeah.
Excellent. Democracy at work by the sound of it.
Yes, it worked very well. I don't know how much effect that ad had on the election results, but the results were that Mary Lou Gelbart, who is the independent who had been sitting on council last year, got back in, and she was by far the best of the lot that were standing. Jack Jarney, the Turn the Tide candidate, got back in again.
He stood again?
Yeah, he stood again, and he got back in again, which was just beyond everybody's wildest expectations. I mean, poor old Jack didn't think he was going to get back in. I mean, because he had about 5 Ratepayers Association people standing against him.
Right.
And, of course, they're all backed by, well, I probably can't say quite who, but I mean, they're
with
all...
money.
Yeah, well, they're all from outside developers, of course. I mean, like, the whole concept of ratepayers means that probably most of them aren't actually residents. And the thing is, they pay rates, they own property.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm sure the people that own the pub and Mandalay Flats and just about everything else that is about to get developed, are putting a lot of money in there.
Right, and so the result, I asked you before, and you said it's not a good result for the marina. There's still support for the development of that?
Well, yeah. Basically,
what a shit.
Well, I mean, the situation that happened is that in 3 wards, the 3 people who were standing got back in, and in those 3 wards, all of the people that were standing against them were far worse than they were.
In other words, it's just maintained the balance that was there before.
Yeah, there's one more Turn the Tide. The right-wing bastion in the South Ward has been broken now. A Turn the Tide candidate got in there, a fellow called John Endicott. And he displaced a fellow called Bernie Costigan, who is very right-wing. So that increases the Turn the Tide numbers by 1. Now, that is actually quite important because one of the reasons that Turn the Tide has given for all of the compromises they've been making is that the numbers were such that if they weren't making those compromises, they'd just get outvoted totally. So the fact that they have got 1 extra person may well mean that they can take a slightly stronger line and that they will, in fact, have the numbers to do that. So in terms of the developments like the Esplanade and so on, I think it bodes very well. As far as the marina goes, I just don't know. I mean, like, Turn the Tide have already made it quite clear that they're behind the proposal that exists at present.
Yeah, I wish the tide had sweetened. But anyway, it's a good sign anyway because it's a start of people being involved in local council. We just heard from Mick Varney too that the council elections in Camberwell, where there was a large development proposed, another urban development, all 4 anti-development councillors got on. And it just shows that the local government is really important. So now, even just after the council elections, if you are not enrolled to vote in your local government, enrol. Even Bob McDonald has enrolled, the Slack hippie. And everyone should enrol because it's probably a more important vote, isn't it, Kate, than a state or federal government vote?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so important, that enrolling to vote. I mean, one of the reasons why none of us stood in St Kilda was basically because our whole support base, and that's all the guys that drink down the pub, aren't enrolled. I mean, like 90% of our support base wouldn't be enrolled to vote. Now, if the election results are any indication, I mean, the most radical candidates in all wards got in. Now, the benefit on Saturday night, which I'll talk about in a minute, was so successful. I mean, 1,500 people came along. We made a heap of money. I mean, those 2 things combined show that there was a very strong statement being made, and I think that if we can get all of those people to enrol, it's quite possible that we can get more radical people in next year, and maybe things like the marina could be stopped.
Excellent, excellent. All right, mate. Well, some notes on the news, and I suppose if you've been flicking through the papers, the best thing that I've seen, and it's not often you give a plug for a right-wing journal, but The Australian has been peaking. As a newspaper in the past, it was renowned perhaps in 1972 and 75 for the campaigns that it ran against the Whitlam government. And you might remember a journalist strike. Since that time, a lot of people have given up reading The Australian, I suppose people in their 30s now, because they felt that it was too politically tainted. But politically tainted or not, as long as that you know who's writing and where their prejudices lie, you can often sort a newspaper out. And it's very hard with a paper like The Age, where the journalists aren't really known to you, and often their allegiances lie wherever the storyline or press release follows. But with The Australian, they're very clear, and if you want to read from B.A. Santa Maria or John Stone or whatever, you'll find their name clearly in print and usually a photo of the person. As for articles on natural history, we couldn't ask for better. There's an excellent series of articles in the Weekend Australian, and one that's a really interesting one, and we hope to do an interview on next week, and it's entitled Tourist Dollar Endangers a Fragile Forest Sanctuary. And this is an area up near Coffs Harbour, and it's called the Bongal Bongal Forest, and it is an area just north of a property called Bundadjan. Bundadjan was significant because it was bought by a group of people to save it from development. Some 200 people bought it, all chipping in shares together. You might remember us mentioning a unit trust a year ago if you're long-term listeners, and they got something very similar to that together. Anyway, just north of Bundadjan, there was a property that was formerly owned by Australian paper manufacturers. It was part of their experimental flooded gum plantations, which, by the way, didn't work, and it was also part dairy farm, part cleared, and part bush. The interesting thing about this particular patch of rainforest is that most of the scrubs is open, dry scrub. When you get in behind the sand dunes, there's a really large area of sort of swampland. Well, it's been swamp for so many thousand years, and it's been wet for so long, and it is good rainforest stock up there, that it's come up an amazing palm and rainforest gully right in behind the sand dunes on the beach. Not only that, but it also has little terns there, which are quite a rare bird, and they nest along the beaches there still. There's not sufficient foxes in northern New South Wales to worry them, an animal we'll talk about a bit later, due to the ticks that seem to wipe the foxes out. And so we don't have a fox problem, we have a lot more birds, and also in the dunes there, I've caught by hand those little marsupial mice, those fat little doovers who mate themselves to death on a yearly basis. Antechinus studio, I think it was the one I caught, running around in the dunes during the day. And we'd often seen on the beach there these scampering little tracks and wondered what they were. And sitting up on the edge of the dune looking into the rainforest, we saw one running through the grass and were able to grab it by hand, which was quite a buzz. And an excellent area. We'll talk to Trevor more about that next week. Where he is, I'm not sure. Also in the Weekend Australian, and this is on the front page of the main paper, Out Foxton Now on the Brink of Extinction, an article about Palmer wallabies, a wallaby that's had a second chance. More about that a little bit later, and we try to bring up Peter Piggott. Law without teeth can't keep alligators out. Almost in response, and you might have seen Animal Traffic, the last series last week, which had, in fact Tuesday last week I think it was, that had Tuesday week before, but did a really scathing series, a scathing show on Australia's controls over export and import of wild animals. They were particularly looking at the illegal smuggling out of animals from Australia, reptiles, birds, and now in some cases fish. With the case of smuggling in, it appears, probably not accidentally, also in the Weekend Australian, that a couple of American crocodiles, or alligators I think, alligators in fact, have been smuggled into the country and have been taken by National Parks and Wildlife.
What are they smuggling in?
Well, it's been very difficult to bring animals into the country, and there's been a change in a new act put in place that allows a quarantine period for importing birds and reptiles. I don't know if they tackle reptiles, but certainly for importing birds.
But what sort of animals do they bring in? What sort of birds?
Well, collectors keep, rare parrots, African lovebirds have been an example, other kinds of birds. And for years you haven't been legally allowed to bring them to the country because of bird-borne disease and so on. And the collectors have had to rely on aviary-bred birds from Australia. Of course, this sets up the same problems that we have reciprocating with overseas countries as far as illegal smuggle of Australian birds out, and they think one way of tackling it is to legalise the import of birds but have a quarantine station. So 2 quarantine stations have been set up, one for the eggs of the birds where you can import a live egg and keep that. I think that one's in Adelaide, and there's one in Sydney for the actual live birds themselves. And
that'll make their travelling conditions a lot better, because otherwise the big problems was that they always died on the way because they were shoved into tubes and things.
That's right, so it's going to be a hell of a lot better. Also too, some good news, strange good news, the Lemon-Tine, we won't dwell on it today, but the Lemon-Tine, what do we get? Richardson's agreement to 80%. Next thing we see in the paper, Richardson thinking of leaving politics. Can you make head and tail of it? I can't. When one of those federal ministers deigns to talk to us on public radio, we'll find out what's going on from the horse's mouth. It's no good trying to run through the interpretations. We've got a pile of articles about 6 foot high on it, and it is almost impossible to decipher. I don't know how you feel at home, but I am confused. I take words of care for Jamie Kirkpatrick, who was a naturalist and said 100% of the area should have been World Heritage Value. Now this 80% and not World Heritage is weird. I can't work out what's going on, and I suppose all I've heard is that people in the ACF are going flat to the boards in the Australian Conservation Foundation. Also, too, a good plug for the Australian Conservation Foundation. There's nothing better than a relative visiting, and my brother went in there to get some information, got a fantastic reception at their Glenferrie Road office.
Did they know that he was your brother?
Certainly didn't. Got a small desk and got everything laid out for him. Also, the Australian Conservation Foundation has given a desk to young Sean Rogers, who's been working on Greens Bush and be working from there. It's fantastic to see that, in fact, it's been quite exciting the last few weeks. And despite the heated debate last week on kangaroo farming, Peter Pruce was excellent, and we got on really well after the show and had to talk about lots of things that we have in common, apart from kangaroo farming. And it looks like building a good foundation.
Becoming friendly with the ACF?
No, it's not a matter of Bob becoming friendly. I don't know how to put it, but it's not a matter of Bob
He has
becoming...
to get credit where it's due, don't you, Robert?
That's right. And speaking of credit where it's due, a sad departure from the station too. Stephen Walker, programmer who, I suppose, living in the Dandenongs and feeding king parrots, always had something more in kin with the Eclectic Parrot than just about anybody else at the station, and Jean Tattersall have both resigned, and best wishes to them both in their future jobs. Stephen helped a hell of a lot behind the scenes with getting the parrot off the air, a lot with encouragement in the early days, in giving us, I think we started off 11 to 12, and one day we came in and we were sort of 10:30 to 12, and he'd give us another half an hour, and then we got a double time slot change, and it was really good, and his support over the years has been a great benefit to getting it off the ground, and he'll be sadly missed. One thing that we will give out for any past station employees, we're going to have a parrot gold pass. That means you can do any parrot trip for nothing. That's prom trips or anything. They might want to put up with me for 2 days, but then again I'll probably run a tour without me there, might even be better, but that applies to Jean, Stephen, and also Richard, who left a little bit earlier on. So, sad departure, but I think with all things in public radio, the wages aren't hot and the work is really hard. And remember, Stephen also did his own show, The Ghost, and that meant that going back to Selby by train, he was often getting there at sort of 9, 10 o'clock at night and so on. And he did this over 3-4 years. I think he worked as a volunteer for a year before he was employed. That's a lot of hard work. He's organised 135 shows to air, and for him and the station manager, Jean Tattersall, who herself was fantastically supportive of the parrot in the days and helped us all the way through. Our best wishes to their future employment, and we hope that their contribution is never forgotten to the station. And sometimes in all this hurly-burly of politics, people get more involved in personalities than they do in results, and they certainly got the results. Okay, well, into a track and back with Lionel Elmore to talk about barred bear. Whisper, and that's a track from Schnell Fenster, a new group featuring Phil Judd and Noel Crombie, ex-Split Ends, and I should read 45 RPM, a little reminder Bob played at the right speed. And now we have online Lionel Elmore, and to talk about bandicoots. But just before we speak to Lionel, just a mention of the Greensbush bus trip. Yes, we've picked a date, the 27th of August, if you want to go down with a group of naturalists down to Greensbush for the day, around the whole park, the upper catchment, the lower catchment, the Penn State Park, Cape Shankill on the beach, the whole lot. Just give us a ring, 419-2066, and Mick will take your calls. He's out there now, and get bookings. We have about 24 people up. If we can get 45 people up, we have a full bus, and then we go.
What's going on down there at the moment, Bob? I haven't heard anything about it for a while.
We'll talk about it a little bit later. I think we've got Lionel on the phone now.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we'll give a bit of a roundup, a good point, Kate, and we'll bring that up soon. But firstly, there was an article in the paper today about the relocation of 6 pairs of bandicoots, barred bandicoots, 6 barred bandicoots, 3 pairs, I think, to Jelly-Brown Hill National Park. But often with these animals, small marsupials, we know little about them. But someone who does know a lot about them is Lionel Elmore. G'day, Lionel.
Bob?
How's it going, mate?
All right. How are you?
Oh, good. Lionel, you lived in Hamilton for many, many years. When did you first run into barred bandicoots?
Well, almost as soon as I went to live there. They were very plentiful about 25 years ago, and there were quite a feature of the landscape at that time, but not now, unfortunately. They've declined greatly in numbers.
Before we get on to the decline and the reasons for it, Lionel, would you like to describe the animals and the kind of place? You had a farm just out of Hamilton. Did you have some on your property?
Oh, yes. We had a large, as a lot of farmers do, we had a large garden fenced off from the farm, and very often in the evenings, especially in the summertime, we'd sit on the veranda, and if you stayed very quiet, you'd often see a bandicoot or two come out on the lawn and play around, or else looking for food.
Right, now what did these little animals look like and how big were they?
Well, it's a bit hard to describe. I hate just talking about rats, but they'd be about the size of a common rat, but altogether different in appearance, of course.
Very sort of sprightly, muscular little animals with a long nose.
Long nose, which implies a very sensitive nose. Their front claws are more like a cat's claw, which makes them very useful for lifting worms, slippery things like worms and grubs out of the soil.
Right, and their coloration, Lionel?
They have a greyish colour with darker bands, more particularly on their rump, more noticeable on their rump, and which renders them very hard to see when they're not moving. Hawks would be their enemy, and also in the past, hawks would have been their main enemies, and now, of course, farm dogs and
foxes too, I suppose.
Introduced foxes and cats in that order, perhaps.
Right, now, the bandicoots lived always, it seems, in some association, particularly in the summertime, with wet areas, like the banks of the Grangeburn River that flows through Hamilton. Would you like to describe a little bit about their habit and where they tend to live and what their habitat requirements appear to be to you, Lionel?
Well, they're an animal, but I go back a little further.
Mm-hmm.
The needs for breeding are stimulated, or breeding is stimulated by high-protein food when it is available at different seasons. And for that reason, I'm rather sceptical about the usual approach which has been publicised quite a bit, in that they're anatomically capable of having up to 6 young every 12 days. Well, that does not happen in nature. Their breeding, as every farmer would know from his livestock, is stimulated by the supply of food at particular times of the year and the lack of supply at other times. One particular food that they enjoy is underground caterpillars, which do a lot of damage to pastures, and also cockchafer grubs. Most people would have seen those as sort of a U-shaped or horseshoe-shaped grub, whitish grub with an orange-coloured head or a black head. And they are, as I mentioned earlier, they're equipped to extract these from the ground they detect them. They're underground, as I said. Their nose tells them, gives them the location, and they pick them out with their sharp claws. Stimulates breeding, and it's usually in the autumn or whenever food is available rich food is available in such quantity.
Right, now, why are the wet areas so important to the bandicoots, Lionel?
Well, the summer months are their difficult time for food normally. The cockchafers aren't breeding. Worms are way down below the surface and therefore inaccessible, and they do have a difficult time to survive at that time. But the moist areas, of which quite a lot around the Western District, if you look, there's flat areas which along creeks, where worms and such like are available, and the seepages around a lot of the volcanoes. So it's a lifesaver to carry them over from year to year.
Right, now, when was the first... There was an event that you were talking about earlier that led to maybe the first big crash in their population. Would you like to tell us about that with the aerial spraying?
Well, in January 1965, a lot of the farmers in the Hamilton district were growing oats for export, largely to Italy. Well, as often happens, army worms attack these crops just about harvest time, and they nip the heads off the oat crops in particular and do a lot of damage. Well, crop spraying was more or less in its infancy in that district at that time, but in a matter of weeks, the planes, they said, from all over Victoria and even interstate coming to spray around our area, and I believe that was when they were practically wiped out.
Right, now, that would have been an absolute crying shame at the time, and very hard for a naturalist in those days, and attitudes then towards the bandicoots from the council, the local members and the powers that be were not the sort of enlightened attitudes that they seem to be portraying now. You had a display at the Hamilton show at one stage, and you had trouble getting to be with your display when the politicians went through. Would you like to tell us about that, Lionel?
Well, yes, I used to. This is a little after I'd come to Hamilton, and we'd done quite a bit of research on these animals, and I photographed them and had enlargements made, and we presented, I suppose you'd call it a diorama, in the Hamilton Agricultural Show, which was held in one of the pavilions, the showgrounds. Well, I used to hand out pamphlets which we'd prepared. There was quite a lot of interest in these. I did it over a number of years, but I think you asked the question about, there was one occasion when Mr. Hamer was on a visit to Hamilton, but I wasn't aware of his coming. And how I found that he was in the district was when I was on duty at this diorama, and the attendant said, "Would I like to come outside for a minute?" And I said, "Well, I can't stay long." But anyway, I went out and he shut the door carefully behind me, and he disappeared. And I only found out afterwards that Mr. Hamer had been on a visit, and he had shown quite a lot of interest in the display, which another member or our president of the local naturalist club explained to him.
Yes, these things happen. Lionel, there was another event too that hit the bandicoots hard, and that was the making of a lake on the Grange Burn in Hamilton, and came from that some reasonably ludicrous suggestions about early relocation.
Yes, well, 1967, 68 was a very bad, we had quite a severe drought over those 2-3 years. And we did notice that the bandicoots were only to be found along the Grange Creek from Strathkeller down to Yulcart and perhaps further, certainly at the sewage farm. They survived there, and that indicated to me that those are important areas for the bandicoots.
Right, now the making of the lake, that where you feel like me that maybe a lot of things could be done more in Hamilton itself to encourage the bandicoots around Hamilton, and one thing I know that you did was fenced off your dams and let the vegetation grow thickly to give them cover. Would you like to explain a bit about a bandicoot getting away from a dog or something like that, and why that cover is so important?
Yes, well, their markings protect them from predators from the air. So if you fence in an area, the grass is left long, and they've got excellent shelter there from aerial predators. But there is a need to fence in dams and such like, but it's important that the fencing excludes dogs. It means your wire mesh needs to be something like about 4-inch squares perhaps, which allows bandicoots to go through but not the dogs. And they know they're safe, they can breed in those areas, and they know the refuge areas is safe.
Right, so do you think that more encouragement for farmers in the Hamilton district would be a better option than Jellybrand Hill? And how do you feel about the relocation to Jellybrand Hill? It's not an area, it's an area with wetlands, Lionel?
Look, to be honest, I haven't climbed Mount Jellybrand. I notice in looking at the map, it's several miles to the east of Lake Corangamite, which today covers 100 square miles, but the first settlers, at the time of first settlement, it was 700 square miles. It's greatly extended, and I think it's possible that they were recorded from Mount Jellybrand, I believe, in the early days, that it's quite possible they had access to the moist areas around Lake Corangamite.
Right, and then that would have been for their summer feeding.
Colac there, I'm wrong there, Lake Colac. Yes.
Right. Okay, Lionel, well, and you're going to be in contact, I understand, with the people doing the reintroduction at Lake Jellybrand in the near future, at Mount Jellybrand.
There's just one point I'd make, that I think in selecting locations, mightn't be a bad idea, it'd be a good idea to survey the food supply for the bandicoot. I think the location should be governed to a big extent by the food supply, as I've outlined, to have summer food and survival food, and in the autumn when they breed, mostly have the other richer foods available to them.
Right. Okay, Lionel, well, look, thanks a lot for that information, and at least the bandicoots have got a hell of a lot higher profile now than what they've ever had in the past, and maybe some good things towards their conservation can happen.
Can be done, yes.
All right, mate. Thanks heaps. And that was Lionel Elmore, excellent naturalist, someone who taught me bloody heaps, and someone who lived in Hamilton for many, many years. Okay, into a track, and then speaking to Gerard Closs and Rod Fensham, who's just rocked in. Gerard about the Plenty Gorge, and Rod about a totally different place, Melville Island. But first, the track. Brian Eno and David Byrne, very, very hungry. Brian Eno, David Byrne, very, very hungry. And you're on 3RRR, Eclectic Parrot. The time is 1:24. And in the studio with us, Gerard Closs. G'day, Gerard.
Hello.
Gerard, you've been working on the natural history of the Plenty Gorge up there now, sort of heading towards Hurstbridge, past La Trobe University, neck of the woods. Would you like to just give people a bit of a locale of where everything is up there and where you're working, what kind of area?
Right, yeah, the Plenty Gorge starts from Greensborough and then extends north for about 15 kilometres up to Bridge Inn Road, which is just west of Mernda, east of Mernda. Varies in depth sort of from around about 80 metres, and then it slowly gets less deep as you head further north.
Right, now, there's one of these areas in Melbourne with Vince Aventi, who we'll hear something from a little bit later on. We're talking about corridors. I suppose the Plenty Gorge would be a classic example of an important corridor that leads from outside into the urban fringes.
Yeah, leading as it does right from, well, Greensborough is sort of the extent of the current urban sprawl. But the gorge extends north for 15 kilometres, then the Plenty Valley continues on further north from that, linking in with the large area of River Red Gums to the west. And there's also a large area of, well, it links into the Yanyeen Reservoir catchment, which heads off to the east. And that links up then into the Great Dividing Range.
Right, now in this area, when you mentioned the River Red Gums, but what sort of bush is in the gorge? How would you describe it? Maybe from the Greensborough end working back.
Right. Within the gorge, there's mostly dry sclerophyll woodlands. There's
dry sort of eucalypt.
Dry eucalypt woodlands, yep. Different types of patches, mostly yellow box, but there's also a few patches of red ironbark and also yellow gum, which are types of eucalypts more normally found north of the Divide.
What's the understory vegetation like there?
It's patchy. Where grazings, where cattle have got in, it tends not to be very good, but you tend to find every now and again you'll come across this fantastic patch. And
Right.
within those patches, you get this lots of orchids, native grasses, very few weeds.
Right, so you have these resilient patches of native vegetation. We're hearing about this a lot lately, aren't we? Because this is at Mullumbullen Creek when Doug Frew went in to do the survey, an area written off by a CFNL Mammal Survey Group, at least from our indirect caller one time on air, as being entirely European vegetation. Doug was surprised to find these islets of indigenous ground flora with, full diversity apparently. And it's a similar experience to yourself in Plenty Gorge.
The impression I get is where you haven't had much disturbance, particularly grazing or earth moving. A lot of the native communities seem to hang in there quite well, keep out the weeds, but as soon as the least little bit of disturbance comes in, it goes downhill rapidly.
Right, now what about, I know that you worked on the fish in the Plenty Gorge, and I suppose a lot of people are confused as to what's a native fish and what's not. And maybe I suppose we could start by saying that trout aren't native, neither brown trout or rainbow trout, but we also have tench, redfin and other fish. What kind of verminous fish, first of all, are in the Plenty River?
Right, the verminous fish, starting off with the ones which came from Europe, the redfin, the roach, goldfish, so far no carp.
Little goldfish, like as if in your tank goldfish.
Yeah, goldfish are probably one of the most widely spread noxious fish around, mainly because when people get them in their goldfish bowls from the pet shop, they then grow too large and they pop them into the nearest river. So I think every slow-flowing river around the state you'll find goldfish in, quite distinct from carp.
Right. Now goldfish are from China originally?
Yeah, Central Asia, around that area there.
Right.
But they're in the world's most widely spread fish.
Amazing. Now, with you've mentioned these introduced fish. Do you have also rainbow trout and brown trout in the Plenty River?
Yeah, well, the other ones there's mosquito fish. I'll go on to them first. That's
right.
The one from the Gulf of Mexico. That's the live-bearing one, very similar to the guppy. And that was spread originally for mosquito control. But probably a lot of the native fish are better anyway, and the mosquito fish are probably chasing them out of their own habitats.
Very small fish then, being guppy size, you're only to an inch long or so.
Yeah, they grow up to about, the largest grows up to about 4 centimetres long, but they have a habit, one particular nasty trait they have is actually they swim up and nip other fish's fins and slowly stress them out of existence. If you put one mosquito fish in with a couple of other large, say goldfish or other large fish into a tank, after a while you'll have this dead goldfish and one tiny little mosquito fish swimming around happily.
And they're just a full-on harasser.
Yeah, just pester it to death, basically.
Oh, God.
The other fish worth mentioning are the brown trout and the rainbow trout. And from the turn of the century, there was something like 300,000 trout released into the river. The fisheries in those days
Into the Plenty River. 300,000.
Yeah, they had a policy of chucking trout into almost every stream or every bit of water they could get it into, irrespective of whether the fish could actually breed there. And the Plenty River itself, being slow flowing and quite badly silted up, the substrate from surrounding agricultural activity, there's nowhere for the trout to breed, so there probably aren't any of them left. The other fish that have been introduced, which are worth a mention, are actually native fish coming from the Murray-Darling catchment. And there was two of them. There was the Macquarie perch and there was the Murray cod. And the Macquarie perch didn't seem to make much headway and disappeared fairly quickly. The Murray cod, it seems, lasted up until maybe the 1950s, 1960s.
Now, the Murray cod that have been reported coming out of the Yarra River at Eltham, would they have been introduction too into the Yarra?
Yeah, they all came from the same stock. There was a small hatchery down in the Yarra, down near, I've forgotten where, but down near Richmond somewhere. There was a small fish hatchery in that area, which they bred up Murray cod for that purpose.
Right. And now with one fish too that I'm not very familiar with is the tench that's often mentioned. That's a fish of the Plenty River?
Not that I know of. The tench is found throughout the Yarra system, but it seems to have been outcompeted by the carp, which came in later into the Yarra system.
Now, where does the Plenty flow to too? That'll help.
It comes out into the Yarra River at Heidelberg, Yalambee, down in through the back of those golf courses, Rosanna Golf Course, that area there.
Now, so you've got carp in the Yarra. How come have we got carp in the Plenty River?
Not as far as I know. what seems to have happened is that the lower reaches of the Plenty flowing as it does through an urban area are virtually polluted out of existence. And I get the feeling that forms a barrier between the upper reaches, which have got a reasonable water quality, and the Yarra itself. So it's also badly silted up and badly degraded in that area, so it's quite an effective barrier.
Right. Strange thing when pollution acts as a barrier preventing verminous fish from going upstream. With the native fish in the river, what ones have we got left in the Plenty?
In the actual gorge area, the only one that's left is the short-finned eel, which is the migratory species. So that comes in from the sea, moves upstream, and that can tolerate extraordinarily low oxygen levels. And because of that, the pollution in the lower reaches isn't a barrier to it. It can move upstream quite happily.
Right. Now, their migration's probably worth a mention. It's quite an extraordinary one, isn't it?
Yeah, they head downstream, grow up to adulthood in the river itself, then head downstream.
Over how long does it take them to become an adult?
I think 10 to 20 years.
Right.
It can vary. I think females take a bit longer, growing somewhat larger. They then head east, and up the east coast of Australia, up to the Coral Sea. There they spawn, and it's presumed they die there. And the larvae are planktonic and float back on the currents, which wash down the east coast of Australia. And then, depending on where they are, they turn inland, turn into one of the river of their choice.
And these are the little elvers that you see all through the rock pools of the bay. What time of year do you like to see elvers? I'm just trying to remember when I used to see them.
Not quite sure. No. I don't know that
It'd
one either.
be autumn, maybe winter. No, autumn, winter. Yeah, I can remember going down to the rock pools down at Middle Brighton. I've got a particular memory there, and also at Morris fossil hunting, and there was just thousands of these little green elvers all over the place. Are we talking about the same beast?
Yeah, they move upstream in huge numbers as well. I think a few people do actually catch them. I know in Europe and Britain, it's quite a popular sort of food in some areas.
Just eel elvers?
Eel elvers. You put in sort of fish traps, and they swim upstream into these fish traps. You can pull out bucket loads of them. There's a bit of a... I think in the southwest of England they sort of have live elver eating competitions and things like that.
Live elver eating competitions. Oh, Pigpen, that's one for you, mate. You can go to Melville Island and take a bucketful back. Amazing. Oh, geez, I tell you what, I hope they die before they come out the other end too. Anyway, with so the eels now, how far do we get any other native fish in the Plenty?
Yeah, not so much in the gorge itself.
Mm-hmm.
If you move further upstream, you move into the more swampy areas. You have a few remnant Melaleuca swamps, and in those areas you get the southern pygmy perch, which is a small native perch. That's quite a common fish. It occurs right through all the sort of the Yarra lowlands. Another fish, which is an interesting one, which is the common Galaxius, one of the Galaxius small native fish. Immaculatus, that's
right.
the one. And that's normally a fish which migrates between the sea and the rivers. And what seems to have happened when they built the Turong Reservoir in the upper reaches of the Plenty catchment, a population of Galaxia immaculatus actually got cut off there in this reservoir. And there seems to be a remnant population which goes backwards and forwards within the tributaries of that small reservoir there and breeds there.
And they breed in the reservoir rather than
Seems
the
like
estuary?
it, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Any other natives up there?
Blackfish, it's probably fairly low numbers in the Plenty itself, although the habitat itself structurally appears quite good. In some areas, what's probably knocked them out in the lower reaches is pollution, siltation actually, which has coated the breeding substrates, and probably competition from the introduced fish.
Okay, when you say, you've mentioned the siltation and coating of a breeding substrate, what does that actually mean to the layperson? What's going on the bottom of the river?
Right. Some fish breed actually in the gravels down in the clean. They require clean river gravels for breeding. A lot of other fish, much like, so if you get the native birds which depend on hollows nesting in the trees, a lot of our native fish also depend on hollows in the river, and they actually use the branches of trees which fall into the river as breeding substrates, and it's within those hollow logs that fall into the river that they actually lay their eggs, and in particular blackfish, Murray cod, a couple of others which I can't think of offhand.
Right. Now, so that fish faunae, I suppose, in going upstream, we're sort of building an impression of the Plenty Gorge itself, of the river not being real good water quality in there, but the vegetation being good to outstanding. But as we move up, we have better and better veg and more diverse habitat opportunities. or does the vegetation itself peter out again as we get into the agricultural land?
Well, what's happened in the gorge is the gorge itself is quite isolated, or has been up until now, from any disturbance. And because of its steep-sided nature, no clearing took place. As you go out, then head further north, you come out into this sort of low-lying flat area, which has been virtually completely cleared of any vegetation, in some areas anyway. It was originally a very large swamp, which was drained, I think, in the 1850s. Over to the west, though, one of the tributaries, which is called Barber's Creek, it flows up, and underneath that, naturally, it would have been a grassy understory with a huge river egg scattered through it. What's happened is, just with the agriculture, they moved in the cattle without actually chopping down the trees, and so they've basically taken away the understory but left the trees.
Right. Now, what about other wildlife values? I know George Paris from the Trade Wildlife Reserve has spotted things like swamp wallabies moving up and down Plenty Gorge. Have we got wombats in there?
Not recently. There's rumours that they occasionally turn up in the area.
Mm-hmm.
It seems because of the links in with the gorge, heading north, that you've got those red gums up, heading up north into the Great Dividing Range and up through Yan Ying, where there's a continuous line of vegetation between the ranges and the gorge itself. You do get animals occasionally, like swamp wallabies and wombats, moving down.
What other smaller native animals do you get?
We've got chewins in some patches.
Chewins.
Yep.
Yeah, they're an interesting animal, well worth describing. A small marsupial carnivore. Again, I suppose, like Lionel, I hate using the word rat-like, but they're about rat size, but very frisky grey with an amazing tail, usually held like a bottle brush when they're excited.
Yeah.
It's almost as big as their body, isn't it, when it's brushed out?
Yeah, just about. I mean, their other name is the brush-tailed phascogale, and I haven't seen them up there. I think Cam Beardsall is from CFNL has seen them.
Excellent. And what are small marsupial mice in there too? The antechinus?
Not as of yet. We haven't come across them. Not a great deal of actual small mammal trapping, I think, has been done, so they may well turn up. It's quite likely.
Right. Now, this area would also be an excellent corridor for bird life, and anything spectacular that comes to mind in that line?
The first one's, I suppose, the most spectacular is probably the Regent Honeyeater, which has been turning up in the red ironbarks.
This is the rare Regent Honeyeater?
The rare Regent Honeyeater.
Right, and it's turned up in Plenty Gorge?
Yeah, there was this spring, or winter actually, when the red ironbarks were flowering a few months ago, there was a couple of Regent Honeyeaters feeding in there. And there had been a nomadic species. The corridors, for them, corridors of vegetation would be particularly important and allow them to move between various patches of important habitat. And I imagine that's what they're doing. They're just moving along the lines of vegetation in the valley.
That's incredible. All right, well, that's amazing. Now, there's things planned for the Plenty there.
Yes, it's Melbourne's next urban sprawl, quite possibly, which at present the government's going through a process of consultation. They have
where they tell you what they're going to do.
It isn't quite as bad as that yet. They've been holding a series of meetings. They had consultants go over the whole valley last year, and they produced this document which showed 3 concept plans and different possibilities for development within the valley. The usual period of public comment on that has just ended, but there was also a bit of a novel idea in that they held a series of public meetings where they, Ministry of Planning and Environment that is, and at them various people spoke and gave their ideas within various workshops. They're now going away. I think they will take a few submissions, but I think the time for that is slowly drawing to a close, and sometime in November they'll come up with the planning schedules, which will be there for comment as well.
Right, and how big a satellite city are they trying to build, and whereabouts in regard to the Plenty River are they trying to build it?
Well, they had, within the concepts, the 3 concepts, there was different approaches within there. Concept 1 was virtually the whole valley developed, with very little left over apart from floodplains, which they couldn't build on anyway. Option 2 was just basically an extension north from the existing urban sprawl, and option 3 was a series of smaller towns dotted around the place. From a conservation point of view, and probably also when you look at the engineering required and provision of infrastructure, I'd imagine that option 2 will be the one that will finally be decided upon, that'll basically get the go-ahead.
Right, which is just an extension of the existing sprawl.
Yeah, it's much cheaper, it's much simpler.
Well, now what's the effect of that going to be on the river that we've just been talking about?
Right. Well, first off, when you start developing an area, turning over large areas of soil, you get a lot of runoff, carrying a lot of silt into the river, so that can affect directly the water quality of the river and choke it up quite badly. The other problem is that they're talking about bringing an extra, I think it's 115,000 people into the valley by the year 2000, and that's going to exert an enormous amount of pressure on the existing vegetation within that area. They are proposing to protect the gorge as a metropolitan park,
But what about the links between the gorge that you've mentioned and the ranges? Will they be lost in these plans?
That's certainly some of the worrying aspects of that. The link between the River Redgums and the Yanyin area was a bit tenuous on a couple of concept plans. There's also another interesting area which is called Quarry Hill, which has interesting stands of Casuarina littoralis, the coast she oak.
Right.
And that's just to the west of the Plenty Gorge itself, and that also needs to be linked into the Metropolitan Park as well.
So what do you think a solution is in this case? Have we got to clearly identify that corridor and seek protection of the corridor values? And things like septic tanks and that are going to be a worry too. That's going to put an incredible pressure on the river. Have they mentioned anything about sewage?
Sewage-wise, the MMBW has a timetable to join the area up into the sewer system by the year 2015, but in the meantime they'll be using...
God, I'm not even going to be alive then, 2015. Mum, you probably won't be with us then, will you?
No, I'll be looking down on all this.
You'll be looking down on it all.
They hope to use temporary sewage treatment facilities, but...
And where's that going to be put into the river?
They'd be put into the river, yeah. And
that's just
tremendous
bloody
risk
ridiculous.
of one-off failures and a big
Oh,
disaster.
no, not again. Progress, yeah, my bum.
That would impact too,
Well,
right
it
down
would,
into the
it
Yarra
would
Valley.
seem really, with any planning scheme, that you'd have the sewage system in first before you put the river, and then you could have your development with a minimal impact, surely, if you avoided the corridor areas.
That makes too much sense.
It does make too much sense. Well, Gerard, if people want to get involved in helping write submissions and doing survey work and so on, is there any way, can they contact you, or...?
Well, we're in the process just now of forming a group called the Friends of Plenty Gorge.
Right.
And, we had a meeting last night under lanterns because the hall in which we booked actually had the lights blacked out, power blackout in the area. But if anyone wants to get in touch with that group, I suppose the person to get in touch is with me.
And what's your phone number?
467
467
23
23
76.
76. 467 2376. That's Gerard Closs. 467 2376. Uncle Bob even writes it down. Make sure we've got everything. Okay, mate. Well, look, thanks a lot for that information, and keep us posted. And we'll catch up with more of the natural history of the Plenty Gorge as it goes on. And you're saying it's not totally too late for submissions, so people can, who have got an interest in Plenty Gorge, contact you, perhaps, is a good way, and get in extra submissions. I suppose you've presented submissions already on the corridor?
Yeah, there's been quite a few, also from various conservation groups in the area, Diamond Valley Wilderness Society, and I think the new Diamond Valley ACF branch put in one as well.
Excellent. All right, well, with a bit of luck, maybe we'll get the sewage first before we get the development. Another job for Snappy Tom Roper, no doubt. Okay, Gerard.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go into a track and we'll come back and talk to either Peter Piggott or Rod Fensham. We'll throw a coin, depending on who's in. We know Rod's here, but where's Peter? Okay, and the time is just after 1 o'clock, 3RRR, Eclectic Parrot. More from Penguin Cafe Orchestra, I think. Dance of Ecstasy or Dance of Ecstasy and Fleas. Wait a second, I'll tell you what it is. It's first edition album. The Ecstasy of Dancing Fleas. Yes, Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Uncle Bob got it right. Music knowledge is improving on a daily basis. And Rod, before we talk to you about Melville Island, which is very far north of Plenty Gorge, I'm sure Gerard will be interested. Mum, you sure saw something interesting. You have to come in close to that mic. I can't get you 7 foot away.
Yeah.
I saw something interesting. You saw something interesting at Coffs Harbour in regard to a farmer on banana farm. Tell us the story.
This gentleman, was about insecticides. It started off, and this particular gentleman who grew bananas had inherited the farm from his father, and his father had got to the stage where he couldn't cope with it all, and he just